Hey everybody, well welcome back to our viewer question and answer series where a viewer from one from every state is asking me 3 questions, sometimes bonus questions, depending how much time we have. And today our viewer is from Oregon, a state I have never been to, so I need to get out to the coast out there and check it out. And you're in Portland, right?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So this is Emily, and Emily has 3 questions. So what is your first question for me?
What is the some of the biggest life lessons you've learned from working in the deaf industry?
Biggest life lessons. That was a big I would say, aside from the cliche, probably take every day like it's worth, because you never know when your time is coming. I think we're often reminded of those when we work around situations where we see how you can go from pure happiness to losing the person closest to you at any moment. So it's not just like my life and my loss, but it maybe, how fragile and how quickly a loved one could be taken care of, but also how some deaths are preventable, and that we can take precautions and we can maybe prevent some things that could happen. So I think there's that, and planning. I'm a huge planner, big planner. And I think a lot of that is I learned from the job, but I also put into the job. So I think it's kind of both sides, that as I see how other people plan and other people do things, and in quick periods of time, like I learn and then can put that back into work as well. So I think some of those things are probably the biggest that I've learned.
So my second question is, like, when the pallbearers were carrying the judge who recently passed away, when they're carrying her down the state stairs, I saw that the front pallbearers had to have their hands like above the air. So how do they keep their hands from like falling asleep because of gravity and just dropping the
Well,
casket?
it's not for too long of a period. So it's not going to be, you're not going to feel those effects that quickly. That's one thing, like I say to pallbearers when we're in the funeral home, if we're walking down really steep steps, don't worry about keeping the casket level. Like when you're leaving and nobody has seen the deceased anymore, if they shift a little bit, it's not as big a deal. When you're going like up and into the church or wherever, you try to keep them a little more level. But when you're exiting and you're going to the cemetery or whatever, it's not as big of a deal. But some people just really want to keep that casket perfectly level as you're going down. Going downstairs with the casket is one of the hardest functionalities to accomplish, because if you're in the back, you're almost bent down. And if you're in the front, it's almost too high, and you're trying to do it all standing sideways. So it is a really hard situation to maneuver, but their hands are going to be fine for that little bit of time. It's almost easier to have your hands up and to be using these muscles. Whereas if your arm is down next to you, you're using your forearm, which is definitely not as strong as your upper arm muscles are going to be. So I would rather have something lifted up above, be the one to do that part. So what is your third question?
So like when they're carrying the body of the Pope, I know that when I was watching the 2005 thing of John Paul II, and they like tilted his body like they showed it at an angle to the people. It's like, how do they know that the Pope's body is gonna not slide off that?
He more than likely, because of so many people watching, especially,
Yeah,
I'm betting that he was tied down somehow to that. Just like with
yeah,
a lot of people ask about extreme embalming and things where people
yeah,
are positioned, there's a lot that you're not seeing. So whether it's zip ties, duct tapes, rods, ropes, belts, whatever it may be, I'm going to assume that he was positioned and locked down onto that so that he wouldn't slide and he wouldn't move, because that's the last thing they want, is there to be any room for error or any room for
yeah.
something bad to happen, because everybody is watching, especially that type of a situation. So I would imagine they took extreme precautions with that part of it.
Yeah.
But it's a great question. I mean, you sit
Yeah.
because when you observe, it's like, well, why is that not happening? But I talk about that viewing deceased is very much like a play and a show. You see certain parts, but there's all this behind the scenes and all this stuff going on, whether it's plastic undergarments to keep from leaking, or there's duct tape, or there's this, or positioning blocks, or whatever it may be. There's all this stuff, but it just matters what you view, and we got the rest handled. So it's just like a play going on. You just watch what's going on in the front and don't worry, because everything is going to be handled in the back, so to speak.
Yeah.
So now I know you said you had a bonus question.
Yeah, I do. So, well, this one's kind of more personal because, like, both my parents have passed away, and we had them cremated, and before we buried them, I wanted to have some of their ashes in one of the a cremation necklace thing. So I told my funeral director that, and they said, of course they'll save some ashes. But as soon as we buried my parents and put the thing, the funeral director told me they forgot.
Oh no.
to save the ashes. So I was like, how would this internment work for something like that, where it's like you want them to stay in the same plot and stuff, but something you wanted, the funeral director forgot to do.
What are they buried inside of down in the ground?
Their urns and a plastic vault thing.
Okay. I mean, they would just open the hole, pull up the cremated remains. It's not an official disinterment because there's no body. So you don't need to go through all the same, paperwork essentially.
Yeah.
But you have to pay the cemetery to open that grave up, to bring them up, to get some out. So essentially, if you have any communication or documentation with the funeral home saying they were supposed to do this and they forgot, then they would need to pay to have the person brought up, to get the cremated remains out for you, and then to bury again. It would be the same as if I forgot to take maybe a necklace off somebody that the family had instructed me to take off. There's, documentation or whatever it is, and then I forgot and buried it, and then I would have to go pay the cemetery to open that grave so I could get that necklace out.
Yeah.
Same thing. I would go back to the funeral home and say, listen, this was supposed to have happened. It didn't. I really want cremated remains from my parents to keep for jewelry. Think about too, like, do you really, like, how long has it been since they were buried?
Few years.
Okay. So it's been a while. So their response might be, well, if it was that important, you would have probably said something sooner. So just to play devil's advocate, I can see that they say something like that. And maybe, if it wasn't important that it's waited this long, maybe do you want to do some like fingerprint jewelry? Maybe they fingerprinted your parents and you can do some kind of a jewelry piece with that rather than get the cremated remains themselves. So think about how much do you truly want those cremated remains, or are they at peace where they're at and you just want to leave them? What other options could you do at the time? If it's the cremation, other type of cremation jewelry or keepsake things, that maybe something else will fill that void that maybe you feel like. Obviously not right. If you ask them to do something, it should be corrected, but it should have been corrected right away. They should have said, we'll get some tomorrow, or we'll go back now, or it should have been corrected. But I also know that as a family, like, you're not always thinking, like, your brain's not firing like this. There's a huge delay. So it might be a few days before it really registered and you thought, man, I do want those. But a few years later, they question why it's taken so long and may not be as keen to doing it because their recollection is not going to be as familiar with it. And they might, they can argue at this point that they don't really need to because it's been so long. So I could see it going one of, either way for you with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like, I kind of forgave them and moved on. I think I was asking more in case, like, someone else had that same situation that I thought would be
Right.
kind of cool to hear
Yeah, I think you just being
that input.
vocal and saying, hey, you were supposed to do
Yeah,
this. Could we rectify it? And in a timely manner. I think if somebody said it a few years down the road, like I said, I would be like, really, do you really want it? Or is this coming? Like, what is driving the question? But if it's right
yeah,
afterwards, obviously we forgot something, we would make it right. I think any business would want to step in and make it right, especially if it was
yeah,
a simple solution like that. Yeah, it costs the funeral home something because the cemetery is going to want to be paid again, but
yeah,
and they may have to break the vault to open and have to
yeah,
replace the vault. So it could be a little costly for them, but if that error is pointed out to them right away, then they can't really
yeah,
argue that it was necessary and supposed to happen. So
yeah. And it's also like I didn't know that it could. I didn't know about. Well, I was a minor, so
yeah.
that made it complicated and stuff. And it's like I didn't know that about this internment and
Oh,
all of that.
you
Like
don't
I didn't
know.
know that it could
Yeah.
happen until
Yeah. You don't know what you don't
years.
know.
Yeah, so I think that's also a reason why I didn't push them too hard to fix it after they told me, because it's like I didn't think that there could be a way that could be legally
Yeah.
unburied and then reburied in the same.
No, totally understandable. Very
Yeah,
understandable. Well, I'm sorry you had to go through that at such a young age with both your parents and stuff. That's a lot.
yeah,
That is a lot.
yeah,
Mm. Well, crazy, crazy. Well, hopefully that
yeah,
answers your questions, though.
yeah. It does.
Awesome. Well, thanks everyone for joining us again for 3 questions and a bonus question with Emily in Oregon. So check us out next Sunday again for a new video from our question and answer series. We're going through every state until I've had somebody from every state. So if you haven't seen your state featured, shoot me a message and maybe you could be the person from your state to ask me 3 questions. Bye, guys.